Hello again. Well, you've heard me mention before that sometimes we have things come in groups. This time we actually have a pair of deluxe reverb amps. One's a black face, the other one's a silver. They were both bought from vintage shops at the top of the price line. So they're both in for service, so it's going to be kind of curious to see what we have to deal with. I'm going to refer to this as Duelling Deluxes. So it's going to be probably a two-part video. We're going to do the black face first, and we'll let you know as things progress. So we have the black face open, and the plot, it thickens. If we look really close in here, we've had a professional rebuild. It's what he was told anyway. They have replaced a bunch of the capacitors. They didn't do very good jobs with the leads. If we look in here pretty close, it looks even worse. They have not replaced any of the plate load resistors. When the customer brought the amp in, he was complaining about some noises, some crackling and popping. He also mentioned that he'd like for it to break up a little quicker, but that's a whole nother thing. I kind of told him, let's get the amp running and see what it's like. Let's get it up running like it's supposed to, and then go from there. Yeah, we've had some really good work done here. This is actually one of my complaints. Now, like I say, this is bought from a vintage shop, and it's supposed to have been gone over by his guy. And this is not very good work. I love it when they just cut off the lead of the old stuff and solder onto it. They've done some work over here in the grounding. We're going to fix that. All the electrolytic capacitors have been changed, but they left all the noisy resistors in. There's a lot of stuff here I changed for safety. A lot of things we changed for noise. And I can bet that a lot of the crackling and popping this guy's hearing are these plate load resistors in the front end. Here's something. They've changed this capacitor on the tremolo. And regardless of what anybody tells you, the proper term is vibrato. It's a volume thing, not a tone thing or a pitch shift. So let's flip it over and look at the caps. Yeah, like I say, this, please, guys, really. Look over the filler caps. He replaced everything with Spragues, which is the same choice I would have made. So then again, our power supply resistors instead of the old carbon comp resistors in, which are probably noisy at this point. And again, they just tied onto the old leads. Let's just twist them up and solder them. We're going to clean all that up. Something else I'd run into when the customer brought the amp in, first thing we fired it up, checked it out. I current limited it, checked it out a little bit while he was here to kind of get a rough idea for him. This amplifier apparently is a late '67 model. Even though the tube chart states AB763, which, you know, it's stuck in the cabinet with packaging tape, so, you know, that's kind of questionable too. It's running about 500 volts on the tubes. So we're going to change these first two caps. They were 475 volt caps, and I figure they've been taking a pretty good whooping from that. I'm surprised they haven't failed. But what the story here is, it actually has the later Silverface power transformer that's meant to be used with a 5U4 rectifier tube instead of a GZ34 or a 5AR4 like the Blackface is used. And someone, trying to correct for things a little bit, has put a 5V4 in it, which compresses really quick, but still it's got the higher voltage. I've already checked this out. If I actually run a 5U4 in it like you're supposed to, voltage drops down to where it's supposed to be. So we're going to start cleaning things up. I'm going to replace a few caps here. I'm also going to replace these resistors. I'm going to clean up the rest of it. We're going to make a tidy ship out of this, and then we're going to see what happens on down the road. I'll be back. Okay, here we are. We've finished up the power supply board. We have cleaned up all the connections. I found some blobs of solder underneath the board floating around. That's always a good thing on your power supply. I replaced the 2 power supply resistors here. That's for noise. I also upped the value on these 2 capacitors, the main filters. As I said before, the original replacements had been stressed, I felt, and I thought they were a matter of safety or reliability. So I bumped them up to a 20 microfarad 500 volt capacitor, because the Deluxes actually have a little bit of an issue. If you happen to power one up without the power tubes in it, the voltage can actually spike up above the capacitor's rating anyway. So I just thought it was a little bit of safety. Since I had to change them, why not take them up a few more volts? So there we go. Let's flip this little guy over. Get started on the other side. I think this side is much cleaner. Okay, so after logging a few more hours, this is where we're at. I have the biggest part of this amplifier finished. I've taken all the caps out, cleaned up the leads, rebent everything, resoldered everything, replaced the plate load resistors, pretty much rebuilt the amplifier. It's much nicer than it was, a lot neater, a lot of stuff flopping around. I'm always careful to clean between the boards on these to make sure there's no solder left anywhere. I think this looks a whole lot better than what we had earlier. Certainly a lot more stable. I've cleaned all the jacks, all the pots. Set the bias. Of course, it's got a new set of output tubes, a few preamp tubes. I've rewired the AC to where it's safer. I don't really like the way Fender did it. There's a couple upgrades for that. I have my preference because I don't like hot fuse holders. So here we are. The downside of this is, as I was finishing the amplifier and getting ready to put it back together, I found out that the speaker has a rub. So it's off to the home shop tonight to be reconed. So get that taken care of for him. I also had to clean up some messiness on the reverb leads. They've already thrown that away, but I should have shown you. Somebody went through a lot of trouble to make it look like they'd done a lot more work than they did. So anyway, I'll get back to the finished product later and we'll check it out then. Well, we've moved on to the Silverface. At this point, I've reconed the speaker and remounted it in the cabinet, remounted the speaker cable. I've cleaned the cabinet up, tightened the mounting bolts up for the baffle, checked the reverb tank out, cleaned the connections on it, and mounted it back in the cabinet. So we're about to turn our attention to the actual amp. So what we have here is a very unmolested specimen of a Silverface Deluxe. There has been an issue where someone's been working on the tremolo. Have to check that out. Everything else looks pretty much dead stock. One thing I will note, that when this amp was brought in, we checked it out pretty quick on the bench to see what was going on, to give the customer an idea of what we were into. And the output tubes were drawing a smoking 55 milliamps a piece. One of his complaints was the amp had no headroom, which you factor, a very running hot set of 6V6s and a speaker that's rubbing and rattling would create a few headroom issues. So we'll flip this chassis over. You can see over here we've had some tubes changed. It's got a bunch of EHs in it. Kind of curious about the rectifier tube. We were talking about the black face earlier having the higher voltage power transformer. And here we have another Deluxe with a 763 tube chart. It has a GZ34 rectifier tube in this one also, so I'm kind of curious to see what the power supply is there. We are going to be doing a cap job on this amp. As you can see, the seals on these are about to pop. I did a rough measurement on them. Some of them are way off. I don't need an ESR meter to tell me if these caps are bad and need to be changed. And I will be changing all the electrolytics in the amplifier. What I have found over the years is the ones that drift the most are your cathode bypass caps, because they're much lower voltage and are never charged. The caps are all the same age. Chances very good if we don't change them now, it's going to cause a problem down the road, and it will sure enough be my fault because I worked on the amp. Of course, that's the way people see it. I always refer to that as the front door back door syndrome. If they only want you to put a front door on your house and the back door falls off, it's not your fault. So I'm going to get into the rebuild on this, and we will get back to this later. Okay, just a quick update. I was checking on this power supply issue, and gotta love it when I'm right. As it turns out, this amplifier is supposed to have a 5U4 rectifier tube. I had measured 455 volts on the plates while they were drawing about 50 mils a piece on the tubes. So what I did was powered everything down, replaced the tube, power supply come down, rebiased the amp to get in a close range for the time being. I'm not really done biasing, but this is for the moment. So right now I'm drawing about 20 mils per tube. Of course, the tubes are very mismatched, so that's got to be changed too, of course. So, as I said, we're biased about 20 mils per tube. Our power supply has dropped from 455 volts to 430, which is supposed to be 420 on these amps, but wall voltages have changed over the years and so on, so 10 volts off is not bad. It's a whole lot better than 455. So I'm going to power this little guy back down, discharge it, and I'm going to start ripping caps out and get this rebuild underway. Well, we're back with our final look at the inside of this amp. All of our electrolytics have been changed. We had a couple leaky coupling caps going to the grids of the output tubes, so that was wreaking havoc on the bias. That's done. We've changed all the bypass caps for the preamp circuitry. Some of the cathode bypass resistors have also been changed because they were way off value. All the plate load resistors and the slope resistors for the tone stack have been changed. So that's all taken care of. We have new screen resistors and grid resistors on the output tubes. Let's make sure everything there runs nice and even. We've replaced the AC cable with a grounded cable, disconnected the ground switch. It can be wired back up if someone feels necessary later. Go flip this back over again. There are our filter caps and our new power supply resistors. Those were changed again because of noise. You want to guarantee noise in one of these older tube amps? Leave the power supply resistors alone that are carbon comp. They love to set and cook. So, this amp's already been play tested and checked out. All the tube sockets have been cleaned, the jacks have been cleaned and tightened, all the grounds have been tightened. It's been gone over what I do in a basic rebuild. Everything is back to normal. The amp is now running at 427 volts. So considering that the schematic for 420 was rated to be at 110 voltage on the wall, and we're running a little higher than that these days, I think we come in pretty close. So we'll button this little guy up, get it ready, and I think the owner will be glad to hear from me.